But you wanna wave, oh wave, oh wave, babe. I know you say that.
In the bustling office complex, a young intern named YN rushed through the gleaming hallways, her heart racing with the excitement of a new day. She juggled a stack of papers, her eyes darting between the digital clock on the wall and the ever-elusive elevator doors. She had to get to the 25th floor, the executive offices, and she was already 5 minutes late for her morning errand. Her boss, the infamous CEO, Mr. Park Jimin, was not one to tolerate even a second of unpunctuality. YN was new to the company, and she had only caught glimpses of Mr. Park from afar. He was a man of few words, and his stern gaze was said to make even the most seasoned employees quiver. His reputation was as cold as the gleaming steel and glass that made up the towering building, and his interactions with the interns were as brief as they were rare. The elevator doors finally slid open, revealing a sleek, mirrored interior that reflected YN's harried expression. She stepped inside, her breath hitching as she realized she wasn't alone. Jimin stood in the corner, his tall frame almost lost in the shadow, eyes glued to his phone. He looked up for a brief moment, acknowledging her presence with a curt nod, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. She tried to calm her nerves, focusing on the digital display as it ascended floor by floor. The elevator was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the machinery and the occasional clack of her heels against the polished floor. As the elevator climbed, YN felt the weight of Jimin's silence pressing down on her. She wondered if she should say something, break the tension with small talk, but she was acutely aware of his disdain for unnecessary chatter. Instead, she busied herself with straightening her blouse and smoothing her skirt, hoping her hands weren't shaking too visibly. The air grew thick with anticipation, or was it just her anxiety? Her mind raced with possible scenarios for their encounter, each more mortifying than the last. What if she dropped the papers? What if she said the wrong thing? What if he fired her on the spot? The elevator jolted to a sudden stop, and the lights flickered before going out. The silence grew heavier, the air stale with the sudden stillness. Panic began to set in, her chest tightening as she realized they were stuck. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, when she heard a low, measured voice in the darkness.
"Don't worry, miss.
Jimin said calmly.
I'm sure maintenance will have us out shortly."
YN felt a spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't going to be the disaster she had envisioned. Or maybe it was just the beginning of something she could never have anticipated.
"Thank you, Mr. Park,"
she managed to murmur, her voice wavering slightly. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, the screen casting a dim glow in the otherwise pitch-black elevator. She could see his silhouette, still and calm, the stark contrast to her own jittery reflection in the mirrored walls. The minutes stretched on, the elevator seemingly suspended in time. The quiet was occasionally pierced by the distant echo of footsteps in the hallways outside, or the muffled sound of a voice over the intercom, but no rescue came. Despite her fear, YN found herself focusing on the rhythmic sound of Jimin's breathing, a steady, comforting beat in the darkness. They stood there, the unspoken tension thick between them, until finally, YN couldn't help but speak.
"Do you have any idea how long this might take?"
Jimin stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently take the phone from her trembling grasp.
"Let's conserve the battery.
He said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it.
We might need it if we're in here for a while."
Her heart skipped a beat at his touch, and she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the stifling elevator air. He turned the phone off, and the light vanished, leaving them in complete darkness once again. The silence grew more profound, yet somehow less oppressive. Yin could feel Jimin's presence beside her, a reassuring energy that she hadn't noticed before. His cold demeanor had always kept her at bay, but now, trapped together in this confined space, she felt a strange kinship with the man she had feared. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence.
How long have you been with the company, YN?
Surprised by his sudden interest, she replied.
Just a few weeks, sir.
What brings you to the 25th floor so early?
Just some papers for the morning meeting.
She said, trying to keep her voice from shaking.
Ah, yes, the daily grind.
He murmured, and she thought she heard a hint of amusement.
I remember those days.
The conversation grew easier as they talked about the company, the city outside, and their lives before the office. Yin found herself sharing more than she ever had with anyone at work, and she was stunned to find that Jimin was not just listening, but actually seemed to care about what she had to say. As the minutes turned into an hour, the situation grew more. Despite the professional distance that had once existed between them, they leaned against the cool metal wall, there. Almost. In the tight space. From his was palpable, and she could feel his breath on her cheek when he spoke. The elevator lurched again, and this time, Yin's hand flew out to grab the railing, her knuckles brushing against his firm chest. He caught her arm, steadying her, and she looked up into his eyes. In the dim light, she could see the concern in his gaze, and something else she couldn't quite place. Her heart raced as Jimin leaned in, his hand moving from the railing to gently cup her cheek.
You're trembling?
He whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. Without thinking, she leaned into his, her eyes searching his in the darkness. And then, as if driven by a force beyond them, there met. The was soft, tentative, but filled with a passion that neither of them had ever expected to feel in the confines of an office building. Yin's mind swam with confusion and desire as the grew deeper, there. Pressed together in the small space. She had never felt this way about her boss, but the warmth of his embrace was undeniable, and she found herself melting into him. The elevator jolted again, and they broke apart, panting and breathless. The world outside their cocoon of darkness had faded away, leaving only the sound of their racing hearts and the electricity that crackled between them. Jimin took a step back, his hand dropping to his side.
I'm sorry, that was inappropriate.
He said, his voice gruff. Yin's chest tightened with a mix of regret and hope.
It's okay.
She murmured.
It's just, we're stuck in here.
He sighed heavily, his hand brushing against hers in the dark.
We can't let this situation cloud our judgment.
They stood there, the silence stretching out once more, the unspoken tension now charged with something new and unfamiliar. The elevator remained still, a silent witness to the sudden shift in their relationship. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the glow of a flashlight pierced the darkness.
Maintenance is here.
Jimin said, his voice even, as if the had never happened. Yin took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. As the elevator doors slid open, she stepped out into the bright hallway, her cheeks flushed and her thoughts in disarray. The CEO followed, his usual stoic expression firmly back in place. But she knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same between them again. But she knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same between them again. Every time she saw Jimin, she felt a jolt of excitement, her heart skipping a beat. The way he looked at her had changed, his eyes no longer cold and distant, but warm and searching. They avoided being alone together, but she could feel the tension building, like a coiled spring waiting to be released. One evening, as the office emptied and the lights dimmed, Jimin called her into his office. His voice was gruff, but his eyes held a tenderness that made her stomach flip. He shut the door behind her, his hand lingering on the knob for a moment before he turned to face her.
YN, I can't ignore what happened in the elevator.
He began, his voice low and serious. Her heart raced as she searched his eyes, finding a she had never seen before.
I know.
She whispered. He took a step closer, and she could feel the radiating from his.
I think we should talk about it.
They sat down, knees almost touching, and for the first time, Jimin spoke of his life outside the office walls. He talked about his failed relationship, his loneliness, and his fear of opening up to anyone again. And YN, in turn, shared her dreams and fears, the hopes she had brought with her to the city. As the night grew late, they found themselves drawn to each other once more, their hands clasping tightly across the desk. They talked of their future, the possibility of a relationship beyond the office. The weight of their feelings grew too heavy to ignore, and they both knew that their lives had taken an unexpected, thrilling turn. The next day, Jimin called a meeting with HR to establish boundaries, ensuring that their newfound love would not affect their professional lives. They agreed to keep their relationship a secret until YN had completed her internship and was offered a full-time position elsewhere in the company. YN felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She had never fallen for someone so quickly, especially not her boss. But every time he looked at her, she knew it was real. Their love grew in whispers and stolen glances, hidden beneath the guise of a professional relationship. And she knew that once she had the job security she needed, they could finally be together without fear of repercussion. But the universe had other plans. As YN prepared to leave for the day, she was summoned back to Jimin's office. He looked at her with a serious expression, a file in his hand.
YN,
He began.
I need to discuss something with you.
Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, wondering if he had changed his mind, if their love was doomed from the start. But as he spoke, she realized that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter in their story. He was promoting her, transferring her to a different department where they could explore their feelings openly. The tension in the air was palpable as he handed her the new contract.
I know this might seem unconventional, but I can't shake this undeniable connection I feel towards you.
He said, his voice thick with emotion. YN took the paperwork, her eyes shining with unshed tears.
I feel the same way.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper. There. This time was not one of desperation, but of promise. They had found love in the most unlikely of places, and now, they were ready to face whatever the future held, together.